Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you guys are having a good day. In today's episode, I'm getting tired of eating chicken and golden carrots. Besides, I feel like it's time for a bit of a change in our diet. We're going to switch meats. We're going to go to pork, the other white meat, I guess. We are going to look at farming hoglins today, the Nether's latest source of food, and something we've done an episode on already in terms of breeding hoglins together and how they interact with piglins, turning them into zoglins in the overworld, that kind of stuff. Today, we're going to get technical with it, and we are going to make a hoglin farm. And you may have seen a few designs already for hoglin farms, and I can more or less guarantee that my one is going to be a little bit different. Although no ideas in Minecraft are truly original, so I expect some of you guys will have seen something like this before, but conventional wisdom these days dictates that hoglin farms should be built like other nether farms on the nether roof where possible, simply because you can get a decent distance away from the farm and guarantee that your AFK spot is enough away from all of the landscape below in the nether, below this bedrock ceiling, that you will end up getting really spectacular spawn rates from your farm. However, that is not the only way to get spectacular spawn rates, and personally, I'm kind of in the mood to do farms in the nether now instead of on the nether roof. It may not be the quickest, easiest, or most efficient approach, but I really feel like the nether deserves a little bit more love, especially considering how much love Mojang has given it in this update. As you explore the nether, you find all kinds of interesting biomes and stuff now. The landscape has changed, and while I fly out of the older areas and into the newer areas, you will start to see that change happen. One of the first big changes is in this transition from the nether wastes to this crimson forest, where just around the corner here, I have come upon a really interesting spot that I think would be kind of great to build a hoglin farm, and it all centers around this location here. This right here is a ruined portal, and every so often when I fly past this thing, I notice some hoglins spawning down here in the area around the portal, and they're usually taking fire damage pretty much straight away because of the lava and magma blocks that they will haphazardly wander onto or spawn on. And believe it or not, this right here, despite the fact that it does not have any crimson nylium around, is in the center, or kind of on the edge actually, of a crimson forest biome. If I take a look at the biome data there on the left hand side, you'll notice it says Minecraft Crimson Forest, and so I'm thinking this might actually be a portal to something different. We could build a hoglin farm right here, and here is not a bad place to build it because we have a pretty sizable lava lake around here, meaning that the lower reaches of the world don't have a great deal of space that could spawn hoglins. You will see a few spawning off in the distance here and there, and also despawning, I guess, because we are more than 32 blocks away from them. And there's a lot of terrain around here that will potentially spawn hoglins, but we might be able to do something about that, and spawn-proofing some of these areas up here might actually be a really neat way of optimizing spawn rates for a farm that is built further down in the world. There you go, I go away to get myself some netherrack so we can start to fill in some of the lava sources on this island, and 2 hoglins have spawned here already. I'm going to try and target them with a few arrows as I circle the island here, and hopefully we can take them out, because I don't really feel like dealing with hoglins while I'm working on this project. Hoglins are meant to be the product, not the problem right now. So yeah, I need to start filling in some of the lava sources around here, because we are going to dig down underneath this portal, and I would like to keep the portal structure here, but we might have to end up spawn-proofing it to make sure that we don't get anything spawning up on the surface, when what we really want to do is spawn the hoglins down below and at as low a coordinate as possible. While I'm here, I will also check out what's in this chest. Ooh, a golden apple, not an enchanted one, unfortunately. We've got a couple of helmets there, and a couple of gold tools and iron nuggets and stuff like that. Man, if this was still my Nether Survival series, I actually wouldn't mind a Protection 4 golden helmet, but I have a feeling we will probably not really need all of that stuff that's in there, so not quite sure what I will do with it yet. But in the meantime, we can start to make a hole down to as close to bedrock as we can get, give or take a block or two, and we are going to set up a farm basically underneath lava lake level. So we're going to be digging down in the center here, and from there we will see what we can do about setting up a farm. And I went away to get some fire resistance potions so we could do a little bit of lava diving here, and I came back to 4 of them. So clearly this is Hoglin Island as far as I'm concerned, and yeah, I need a couple of fire resistance potions here, because if I dig any further down than I already have down here, I start to hit pockets of lava. These islands generate on surface level in the lava lakes, and they do not go all the way down to the netherrack below. So we are really going to have our work cut out for us getting the location for this completely isolated underneath this lava lake, but it's going to be worth the effort, my friends, because we're going to have a very efficient Hoglin spawning farm when we are done. And now, after a little bit of work, here I am down at bedrock level underneath this island. We're going to have to set up a ladder or some sort of means of transport to get us up and down from here. I'm going to come up to Y5 because that's the point at which we should start seeing bedrock, and I really don't want to have to worry about building a collection mechanism with bedrock involved because we'd have to remove some of it. And while the fire resistance potion is active, I will probably just knock out a few of the walls here and see what kind of space we're working with. You know, this seems pretty promising as far as I can tell. Let's clear out a decent sized space here underneath the lava lake, and we'll get to work on exactly how this farm is going to function. Uh-oh, I can't tell. I think that's a piglin. I definitely saw a hoglin looking down from up there as well. I think I've been rumbled, folks. They're onto me. But this right here is the room we're going to be working with for our farm. This is a 14 by 15 room, and the dimensions of it don't have to be exact the way this works, but I kind of feel like making it roughly this size, basically inside of a chunk, or maybe there might be some chunk borders and boundaries here and there inside the farm, but you know, your mileage may vary on this. It may end up being worthwhile making a slightly larger farm or a smaller farm depending on what your needs are. But we're going to make a series of spawning platforms inside of here, basically at roughly a 2-block distance from each other. Let's use the magma blocks to illustrate this, seeing as netherrack is kind of everywhere right now. We want a spawning platform there, we want another spawning platform there, and we may make an additional one another 2 blocks up from there. So a 2-block height is all that's needed to spawn most mobs, including hoglins, I believe. And we'll need a little bit of headroom for the bottom section of this farm here, where there's going to be a kill mechanism of sorts. Now, that could be a lava blade, but I don't really have a huge amount of room to work with, and we're building this farm low down in the world for a reason. If you cast your minds back to the Enderman farm that we built in the end, or any of the farms that we built in Skyblock, you will probably know that building stuff lower down in the world, especially if all of the blocks above it are clear, is going to provide pretty good spawning rates for the farm, because the way Minecraft calculates mob spawns, it will calculate them from the bottom of the world upwards, meaning that anything we build down here is going to have better spawn rates than something on the Nether Roof. The reason the Nether Roof gets used all the time is because of the other factor involved in mob spawning, the amount of spawnable space that the player is standing nearby, and there is going to be a lot of that further up in the Nether right now that we are not seeing because we're underneath the ground. But as you can see, hoglins are quite keen on spawning here, so it seems like we should be able to do okay with this. Now, as I was saying, we could end up killing them with a lava blade down here, and if they die on fire, then the meat will be instantly cooked, allowing us to gather as many cooked pork chops as we want. However, I'm not necessarily entirely in this to change my diet. I may have been telling a couple of pork pies at the start of this episode. What I actually want is a decent supply of pork chops for a variety of purposes, whether that's cooking it myself to turn it into food or trading with villagers, because butcher villagers will be able to give you 1 emerald per pork chop, meaning that we can actually amass a decent supply of trading resources to trade with butcher villagers who have that trade available. And obviously with some zombification and stuff, we can convert them into villagers who will trade us 1 pork chop per emerald, or 1 emerald per pork chop, depending on which way around that one makes sense. But anyway, we're not going to be building the spawning platforms here out of magma blocks. We're going to be building them out of basically any solid block that hoglins can spawn on, which is anything that isn't going to cause them fire damage. We've used magma blocks in the zombie piglin farm to make sure that zombie piglins are the only things that spawn on magma blocks, and so you may be familiar with this concept already, but hoglins will not try and spawn on magma blocks. They can spawn around them. If in the case of the island they have up there, they end up spawning on some netherrack that's adjacent to a magma block, then they can still take damage, but they're not going to spawn on a full platform of magma blocks, which means we're potentially going to have to figure out some kind of way to block piglins and zombie piglins from spawning down here, or at least give them some way that they can die easily and allow more hoglins to spawn. The good news being that hoglins will actually spawn in more or less any light level, whereas piglins and zombie piglins do require a certain light level to spawn. So if we have torches 2 blocks apart here, the light level doesn't get down below 12 or 13, which I believe 12 is the threshold under which zombie piglins start to spawn, and I'm not sure about piglins exactly, but it's probably somewhere around the same threshold. So lighting up this farm well enough, maybe even with rows of lighting blocks in the ceiling or just an adequate supply of torches, is going to make sure that only hoglins will be able to spawn here. So I'm going to make a daredevil attempt to fly out of the top of this without taking any damage from hoglins. Thank you very much. Look at that, 3 of them up there already. This is definitely a good place to be as far as hoglin spawns go. And yeah, we are going to do our best. Look at the piglins looking up at them from inside the hole as well. We're going to do our best to find some decent materials to build those spawning platforms out of, and then the real work begins, because if we want to make this a tall and efficient farm, we will have to spawn-proof a large area of the surrounding nether and pick an AFK spot probably further out into the lava lake here. If we reach out from one side of the farm, we're going to have to make sure that we're in a position that is going to have as little spawnable space around us as possible, which is going to mean doing a lot of work on the terrain around here. And the other things we will need for this farm can be gathered from quite close by. In this neighboring warped forest, I can grab myself a little bit of warped nylium and some warped fungus, because we are going to be scaring these hoglins into the center of the farm and into the killing mechanism using the one thing they fear more than anything, warped fungus. And this time, in the interests of making sure this island up here is a little bit more spawn-proof, because I don't want to remove it entirely right now, we're going to slab the entire thing off using blackstone slabs, which I think are going to look right at home here in the nether, especially surrounding this rather ominous-looking ruined portal. So I'm going to slab off the rest of this. It should also protect me a little bit from the magma blocks, where I don't have my diamond frostwalker boots on to protect me from those. And it's going to mean that hoglins don't spawn up here on the surface and surprise me when I'm entering or leaving the farm. Oh, absolutely beautiful. Made a few extra slabs, and that basically covered the entire island, more or less. We've got a couple of stacks left here, though, and we could always use those for some other stuff a little bit later on. Let's take that crafting table out, and I think we should be good to go here. One of the things I wanted to do inside of this to get up and down from here was place some of these weeping vines, which I'm pretty sure I can just bone meal from here, and yes, they will go all the way down to the inside of the farm, making sure that we can ascend and descend comfortably. And I'm sorry, little piglin, but you're holding an item here. I'm pretty sure you are going to have to go. So there might still be a couple of blocks up on top of the portal that we'll need to slab off, but the rest of this should be totally fine. And now, with a little extra bone meal, we can make our way down into the center of the farm, where I will eventually, I expect, put myself a little entry platform onto which I can then run around and find an AFK spot somewhere underneath the netherrack, which, if I still have my bearings, is probably going to be somewhere in this direction. But we're not going to do that from this level, of course, because that would require me to be on the spawning platforms where some hoglins are going to be spawning. Right now, though, we seem to have a lot of piglins down here. There were a bunch of hoglins when I left the farm, and this is the platform setup we have going on right here. We have a 5-block wide area of blackstone and a 6th block just for decoration. I chose some solid blocks, some solid crimson wood and warped wood here, just so we can identify which platform is which. The lower platform should hopefully spawn a few more things, but the upper platforms, we're going to set those 1 block back each time, so that anything that runs across these trapdoors doesn't then end up running down and landing on the platform on the opposite side. It should just run straight down and hopefully make it into this central trench here, where unfortunately these piglins are all going to have to go, because I need to lay down some hoppers leading to a storage chest over here which will contain all of the drops. So I'm sorry, lads, but yep, you are all for it. And there we go. Get rid of those guys. That last one needs to get taken care of, and we can now set up a chest over on this side, and it's probably going to be repurposing this chest here, which right now I've just used for netherrack storage, but hopefully we should be able to make a go of it with this. So there we go, the hoppers are in. We've got a floor of hoppers all running towards these 2 chests, split individually here, so that we will end up with a couple of different chests of supplies. And yeah, my leftover hopper supplies also ended up in there somehow. But yes, we have a bunch of stuff still draining through the hoppers into these chests from the area I just cleared out. And on top of each of these, we will place down a soul campfire. And I don't think the particle effects are going to be blocked by the trapdoors, so we will get this really nice rising smoke effect. If you don't want to use campfires because of the sheer amount of particles involved, you could probably end up using something like magma blocks and have a minecart collection system underneath here, just a hopper minecart going around a circuit. You'd probably need an extra block of height for that just to make sure that there was enough room for the hopper minecart to do its thing without having to remove some bedrock. But I am hoping that having the soul campfires at this level will enable us to have the killing part of the farm basically as low down in the world as it can be without us removing bedrock. And we can always return our campfire particle effects to minimal if we don't want to deal with all of these particle effects being all over the place when we visit this farm. Now comes one of the most important parts of the farm, because we will need to make sure that these hoglins are adequately scared to run into the center here and run across those trapdoors that are going to lead them to the campfires. We are going to place some nylium. It could be grass, it could be mycelium, or it could be, you know, podzol, or it could be some crimson nylium even. But we're going to place some nylium a couple of spaces apart in here to place the warped fungi on, and that's what's going to scare the hoglins into that central position. So we'll space them 2 blocks apart. It could probably be a little bit further than that, but I want to make sure there are no dead spots in the farm where the hoglins could run to and then stop. And hopefully with these warped fungi being right there, we should see the hoglins running straight towards the center of the farm. We could do a better job than this of lighting it up, actually, if we place another platform up here made of light blocks. If we had something like, I don't know, sea lanterns or shroom lights or even glowstone, something like that, we could put a row of those above, and that would guarantee a pretty solid light level for here. For the next platform down, though, we are going to have to light this up using torches, unless I want to put regular lighting blocks embedded in the floor, but that might not lead to there being adequate spawning space for the hoglins. And the last thing I need to do is make sure I have an AFK spot, and I decided I'm probably going to do one out in the lava lake over here, simply because I think that is going to be a better spot to start our spawn-proofing mission from. So I'm going to have to take the coordinates of that, and we'll need to be 24 blocks away from the edge of the farm to make sure hoglins will be able to spawn here. Okay, perfect. This spot here should be 24 blocks away from the farm. So around here, basically in this end space, is where we want to be. And I'll set up a little marker here made out of, let's say, acacia planks, because they're sufficiently garish for the nether. I think we'll probably put those in the wall here, and that will signify this is where we need to stand to make sure the farm operates. We could always shutter this off with trapdoors or something like that if we want to, if I'm worried about anything spawning down here, but hopefully this space up here should not be spawnable. We're on bottom half slabs to make sure this bit isn't spawnable at all, and I don't think anything will be dropping in on us from above either. So the last thing we need to do is, of course, the most complicated task of all. I'm going to take the coordinates here. We're at 42, negative 1082, and that is the coordinate that we're going to start spawn-proofing outwards from. And of course, if you know anything about mob spawning in this game, which hopefully by this point in the series you do, you will know that it is necessary to spawn-proof in a 128-block radius from the player. Not diameter, radius, because we will need to make sure all of that area is spawn-proofed so that we can optimize the amount of spawning that happens inside the farm here itself. And naturally, while we are down there, it does seem like we're going to be at least 32 blocks away from any other spawnable space, which still means stuff will spawn. It just means it also has a chance of despawning, and that's going to mean that we end up with a few spawns happening in this farm already, even though there are naturally going to be hoglins and piglins and other things up here spawning as part of the Crimson Forest surrounding this anyway. But I think one of the other advantages of this location is that it's right next door to a warped forest, and to my knowledge, I don't know if this is actually true or not, but there are certain types of mobs which do not spawn in large enough quantities to completely take up the mob cap, and I'm pretty sure that Endermen are some of those mobs. They don't tend to spawn in great numbers, and if they do, I certainly haven't witnessed it myself here in the Nether. It may simply be because there were so many other hostile mobs spawning around, like zombie piglins and regular piglins and all of that kind of stuff, but I've never really seen a huge concentration of Endermen here in the Nether. That guy just despawned right in front of me, which is kind of perfect, actually, and I think it's going to be kind of okay if we mostly spawn-proof the rest of the terrain around here and leave the warped forest for now. It will also be kind of interesting to observe the effects that it has on warped forest mobs spawning if we end up spawn-proofing everything else in that radius. And of course, that does mean spawn-proofing stuff that goes up pretty high, but there is a spherical radius around the player, not a cylindrical one, meaning that we're not necessarily going to have to spawn-proof every single block that is within 128 blocks of a circle that we could draw around ourselves and going all the way up to the Nether Roof. Instead, it will be a kind of dome shape that we can potentially miss out a few of the blocks that are on the outside of that curve. But if we want to optimize this completely, oh boy, it's going to be a lot of effort. You've probably seen people doing this with wither skeleton farms before. We're about to do it with this Hoglin farm. But we'll probably end up doing that over the course of several weeks at this rate, because I don't think I'm going to be able to do it all in time for this episode. We're going to make a start, though, and I'll show you some of the methods that you can use to spawn-proof the surrounding terrain when you're making a farm like this inside the Nether. So if we're going to take a good shot at spawn-proofing this location, the first thing I want to do is make sure that I know where I'm starting from. And for that, we're going to rely on the coordinates we took for the AFK spot. So here at X43, Z1082, or negative 1082, here we are, basically dead above the AFK spot for this Hoglin farm I have built. Now, I'm going to bridge out using bottom half slabs again to make sure nothing spawns. 128 blocks in every direction, so 2 stacks of slabs in each direction is the area we will need to spawn proof, and oh boy, this is going to be something. And I think what I will probably end up doing is putting myself down there in that AFK spot, bringing my second account in the world in spectator mode as a camera account so I can fly around and see where the spawnable spaces are. But with this giant plus shape laid out in all 4 directions, I'll at least be able to look down and have a pretty solid understanding of where my perimeter is, just based on these coordinates and based on the lines that I've drawn here. So I'm going to continue drawing the rest of these lines, and then we'll actually start spawn-proofing the areas around here. Alright, so at least now we know what we're looking at. We're looking at a very, very large radius here, of course, but that's part of the challenge, part of the fun. Now, how are we going to spawn-proof all of this terrain? There are a few different options, and I'll discuss each one here very briefly and explain why I'm going to avoid most of them and just go with one, okay? So let's go ahead and do this. For a start, we have what we've already been doing to spawn-proof the area down there, which is slabs. And slabs are a pretty common method of spawn-proofing. People use them all the time. The reason I'm not going to be using these is because of material cost primarily. I'm not entirely certain what I want to slab this entire area with, if anything, and because if you're just running around holding down the right-click button like this, occasionally you do what I just did there and you make a double slab, and that just causes a bit of a break in the rhythm. You just end up placing a full block instead of a slab. You have to break it to get the slabs back, and then you keep on placing blocks, and you can obviously develop a bit of a rhythm with it, but I find there is too much opportunity to make mistakes. Now, a couple of the other options for spawn-proofing are, of course, destroying the terrain, because you can just take some TNT to everything and watch it all blow up. It's very satisfying, and that's kind of what I was doing over at my wither skeleton farm, which I haven't worked on for a while, but I promise I will be back to at some point now that the Nether update is here, and the wither skeleton farm is going to work a little bit differently. But one of the reasons I don't want to destroy all the terrain around here is because I'm using all of my explosives and stuff like that for blast mining for ancient debris. And while, of course, I could spend more time AFK and grinding sand and get more TNT to blow up all of this, once again, this is a heck of a lot of terrain to deal with, and it gets messy. You end up having to basically produce a lot of TNT just to detonate a small area, and you can never quite use it efficiently enough. Of course, there is the option of TNT duplicators if you feel so inclined, but I've always found setting those up in the Nether a bit of a pain because you have the ceiling to contend with, you have mobs that can set the TNT on fire. Generally, it gets a little bit messy, and then taking down the whole thing afterwards is a bit of a pain as well. So I'm not going to TNT this place either. One of the other options, and it's probably one that is best illustrated by the sections furthest out on my little set of coordinate markers there. Had to think a little bit as I was coming into land, just in case I ended up falling in the lava, is to block off areas like this, where there is a small amount of terrain which I can just basically level off as far as the ceiling goes. So I just end up placing a bunch of netherrack in here. It creates a vertical space, and of course vertical spaces not being spawnable for mobs, we just end up eliminating it all by the virtue of placing all of these blocks like so. And while that does create a nice pleasant wall and a little bit of an overhang, of course, where we can just assume nothing is going to spawn because there are no spawnable spaces, it does mean placing a lot of blocks, placing a lot of netherrack, and it's going to look a little bit tidier, but it's also going to take a lot longer than some of the other methods will. So while it may work well for sections like this, it's perhaps not going to work as well for the remainder of the Nether, especially in some areas where there are floating islands where it's going to be more difficult to fill that in all the way up to the ceiling, right? So we probably don't want to do that. I think a mixture of disciplines is probably the best approach here if you want to destroy some sections of it, if you want to take a pickaxe to some of these smaller islands like this. Perfectly sensible thing to do, absolutely fine. I recommend doing that in general because it will also give you a better overhead view of the area you're trying to spawn proof. But the sections around here where there are larger pieces of terrain and clearly lots of spawnable space, RIP to that Hoglin who just ended up wandering off a cliff, I am going to be using buttons to spawn proof these. And one of the cool things about buttons, of course, is that you can get hold of them very, very easily. You don't need a crafting table to make them, unlike the slabs. You can end up making stacks and stacks of them just by breaking down some wood logs, and I have a heck of a lot of wood logs from taking down a few forests in this world and doing a little bit of tree farming. So that's nice and easy to get 4 stacks of buttons, and all you need to do is walk around here holding down right click and spamming buttons on every possible surface. You don't end up doubling up with them the same way you do with slabs, and the whole thing is going to look a little bit weird. The terrain is going to have these wooden studs in it basically for the rest of its foreseeable future, but it is going to mean it's nice and easy, nice and straightforward to do, and you can put a podcast on in the background or something while you are buttoning over all of this terrain. Now, obviously, the flip side of this is the material cost involved and the fact that it's going to take a lot of time. But believe me, this does seem to be a pretty sensible solution to spawn-proofing any project here in the Nether when the terrain is this cavernous, is this unpredictable, and has this capacity for hostile mobs to be around. So I think I'm going to spend a fair amount of time here just buttoning off some of the areas that are closest to this farm, the areas that are potentially going to be within spawnable range. I'm not going to be able to cover this entire Nether landscape in buttons, obviously, but I'm going to do my best with the time I have left for this video, and I'll see you guys on the other side. So I have now spent a couple of hours placing all of these buttons, and as you can see, it's pretty effective as far as spawn proofing goes. Nothing spawning in this area anymore, a few spawns on the perimeter, and still a few areas which are definitely touched while we are AFKing at this farm, or while that point down there is loaded in. All of the terrain around here is loaded in, and there is still so much to do. This is quite the task, and I've only spent a couple of hours doing this. I haven't touched the warped forest at all. I've been sticking to areas of the crimson forest around here, but there are still occasional floating islands which are very definitely populated by hoglins until I do that, until I come in and evict them, I guess. But yeah, we have, oh boy, we have a lot of stuff to cover around here. But regardless of that, the farm has been active in my absence, because even while I've been placing these buttons everywhere else around this area, the farm itself has remained loaded, naturally, because I'm working in areas that are going to keep this area loaded, because we're trying to work towards the opposite situation being the case. And so if I come down here, there aren't any in the farm right now, but I did happen to catch a few of them on camera with my camera account. There have been waves of hoglins spawning inside here, often when I clear the area and then return, because it resets all of the stuff that has spawned in this area. And if I come down to this chest now, we already have about a stack and a half of pork chops in one and nearly half a stack in the other. For some reason, they seem to favor the left-hand side over the right. Not quite sure why that is. It's probably just one of those weird arbitrary things. I did check that all the hoppers were lined up correctly, and they were. And I still need to clear out all of this stuff from the chest as far as all this netherrack goes. But if you take a look at what we've got here, that is a reasonable supply of raw pork chops. And I was thinking about it, and you could potentially even use the soul campfires in this farm to cook the food for you if you wanted to do this in a way that did not involve fuel. All you would need to do would be to hop out of here and then just run along the campfires like this, placing all of the pork chops as you went, and then as soon as they were cooked, they will bounce off of the campfire and get put in the hoppers underneath them. So that is actually a pretty effective way of making sure all of that food gets cooked. It will sit on the campfire for a little while longer. Once it's fully cooked, gets picked up by the hopper again, ends up in the chest, and you end up with a chest full of cooked pork instead of the raw stuff. There you go. It is starting to trickle in as we speak, and that's kind of a fun way you can use this. Not something that I would necessarily recommend as part of the farm's overall design, but an option that you have right here if you should want it. Another reason to use campfires for the killing mechanism, I guess. There is one other thing I wanted to touch on just before we wrap up this episode, and that is that, of course, one of the things I overlooked was being able to spawn-proof the surrounding area with lava. And lava, of course, being abundant at this level of the Nether, all it would take would be you covering a few areas around the outside with buckets grabbed from the lava lake, and you'd probably have some pretty effective spawn-proofing in that sense as well. However, I'm still fairly certain that ghasts and magma cubes can spawn in areas that are covered in lava, because there is still a solid block underneath the lava, and sometimes I've seen them spawn there. Maybe that is just anecdotal, maybe it did the thing that the spawning chamber does down here, where it detected a nearby block and then assigned the ghast or the magma cube to spawn in an area that was already covered in lava because it knew they wouldn't be damaged by that. But still, what you end up with is a lot of lava flowing around here, which potentially makes it kind of dangerous to go through and spawn-proof any of the spots the lava has missed. Much like when we were building the magma flow in the town the other day, it's kind of better to make it out of something that doesn't potentially deal a lot of damage to you and burn your supplies if you end up dying. While lava is definitely an option to use for spawn-proofing, I would advise against it, and I do think using buttons, arduous though it is, to make sure that you can button every single surface area here in the Nether is probably going to be the best way to make sure this farm runs at optimal efficiency, which is a long task in a survival world, but worth doing if you want a really, really effective Hoglin farm. And folks, that is where we're going to leave this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you've enjoyed this look at a slightly more technical build today. Leave a like on it for me if you did. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye for now.